Arthur, Barbarossa, Fionn great heroes that are long dead. But not quite. The King in the Mountain, also known as the King Under the Mountain or the Sleeping Hero, is a recurrent theme or trope in folklore from across the world. These stories are incredibly powerful and impact the national consciousness of a people in a number of ways. In this video, I'm going to explain the main characteristics of the idea of the King in the Mountain, and then take a look at examples from across Europe and the rest of the world. So let's get started. The King in the Mountain theme involves a figure of great importance that isn't dead, but is merely sleeping. These figures are mostly kings or rulers, but they can also be men of great courage too, national heroes. When we look at what the men have in common, we notice a few things. First of all, they're almost always military men. As kings and heroes of old, this mostly goes without saying. They defended their people and land in life, and will need to do so again on their second time around. Secondly, they're men that belong to a group, a people or a nation, and are there for that group. In this sense, they're not there for everyone. In life, they fought against the other. And thirdly, often they're lying in wait with those that followed them in life. Sometimes this is a small band of knights, and sometimes it's a whole army. This leads me on to the topic of location. Where do these heroes lie? Obviously, you've no doubt guessed that many do lie in mountains, but they do lie sleeping in other places too. Hills, under the sea, in underground vaults, hidden chambers, on islands, or in caves. Many of these heroes have specific spots where we know they're asleep under, and so this begs the question, can we find them? Well, yes and no. There are a number of stories where an individual, purely by accident, discovers the resting place of the hero. This is usually because the king or hero has allowed for them to find them so that they can have an update on what's happening in the world above, or present the mortal with a challenge of some kind. In most stories though, the king remains undiscovered and will emerge and be seen at a time that he decides. It's worth mentioning though that there is a magical or mystical element to the stories as well. It's of course open to interpretation, but you can't just simply turn up to one of these mountains or hills where the king is lying in rest and start digging and find him like that. The king exists within another world or realm. This is why in stories where a man does manage to get inside the king's chamber, once he leaves or once he's thrown out, he'll never be able to get back in. Some spend the remainder of their lives trying to find it again, but they never can. They can't ever find it despite looking in the exact place that they ended before. In this sense, the places that the heroes and kings rest are both otherworldly and of this world at the same time. You may find yourself in the exact spot where a king lies in wait, but you'll never be able to see him or enter the chamber or hall that he lies inside. This is what happens in a local story near me at a place called Dunstanburgh Castle, where the protagonist, Sir Guy, having made the wrong choice on the test that he's given, he wakes up the next morning outside the castle and he's unable to enter the mystical chamber that he found himself in. And this is one of the few stories as well where the sleeping figure is a woman, although we don't find out her identity. Sir Guy still wanders around the castle in his ghostly form to this day. We're going to look at some examples and case studies now, and of course the most famous example of the sleeping king is Arthur, the legendary British monarch. Arthur was mortally wounded at the Battle of Cumhaill, and he was taken to the mystical island of Avalon. And there, he waits until he's once again needed. And while in the legend we know that Arthur lies in Avalon, the location of Avalon is something that we don't know. There are dozens of examples in England, Scotland and Wales where Arthur is said to rest, and depending on who you ask, they'll most definitely tell you it's the one that is nearest to their locality. the story that they grew up with, which is completely natural. Glastonbury Tor is the most famous example of where Avalon is said to be, but there are others, such as the Eildon Hills in the Scottish borders. There's also the Isle of Arran, Bardsey Island off the coast of Gwynedd as well, Sowingshields Crags in Northumberland, Richmond in North Yorkshire, King Arthur's Cave in Herefordshire, Cadbury Castle in Somerset, and Alderley Edge in Cheshire, just to name a small number of examples. You could interpret these places as different openings to the otherworldly island of Avalon, or you might think that these places all had their own local chiefs or heroes that over time have become an Arthur, taken on the mythical archetype, so to speak. I've got a couple of English examples now. King Harold Godwinson, the last of the kings before the Norman conquest. In some legends, he survived the Battle of Hastings and will one day return to free England from the Norman yoke. Another figure, while not a king, is a hero of the English. Francis Drake is lying sleeping under the sea and will return to save England when it faces destruction. According to legend, Drake's drum can be heard beating at times when England has faced peril in the past, most recently at the Dunkirk evacuation. It's said that if England is in danger, then someone should beat the drum and Drake will return. Here's a Welsh example, Owain Glyndŵr, the last native-born Welshman to hold the title the Prince of Wales. He vanished during his long campaign against the English. He was, and still is, a Welsh national hero. He was never captured or betrayed, and so his fate is lost to history. He completely disappeared, and his disappearance thus makes it more understandable that he is actually not dead and is sleeping until Wales requires his help again. What I think is the second most popular king in the mountain figure is King Frederick Barbarossa. He lies sleeping in the Cumhaill mountain and will one day rise to save Germany or the German Empire. His beard has grown massively long, showing the passage of time that he's been sleeping down there. Some say that he will rise when the ravens are no longer flying around the mountain. In one story, a dwarf leads a shepherd boy into the mountain, and the emperor asks if the ravens flew around the mountain. The shepherd boy says that they do, so Barbarossa replies that he should return to sleep. In the 1890s, the Germans built the Cumhaill monument on the site of the medieval Cumhaill Castle. It's the third largest monument in Germany and was dedicated to Kaiser Wilhelm I. And we can see on the monument that below the Kaiser is a statue of Barbarossa, complete with the long beard, and he's in a state of just waking up. The Germans were well aware of the King in the Mountain myth and symbolism, and this is a really great example of how leaders can utilise the legacy of kings from the past to show a continuation, or to be depicted as their spiritual heirs. I could go on for hours about all the many heroes that have a King in the Mountain myth associated with them, but here are some of my favourites very briefly. There's a number of examples in literature and film of the King in the Mountain theme, and it's not always with kings. One of my favourite of these is from Tolkien, who wrote of the dead men of Dunharrow. These men who refused to uphold their oath to Isildur were cursed to remain undead as a consequence for their actions, or rather their inactions. They reside or lie sleeping in a way in the mountains, and when Aragorn, the heir of Isildur, gives them an opportunity to redeem themselves, they finally are able to rest, having fulfilled their oath. In contrast to the whole idea of the King in the Mountain too, is the theme of the villain in the mountain, or the sleeping villain. An example of this being Loki, having been bound by the gods but is set free during Ragnarok. A more modern example of this theme could be The Mummy from the 1999 film, where Imhotep lies sleeping or in a state of non-permanent death and is woken by someone reading from the book. It's a whole different topic entirely, but you can see how these ideas still inspire stories to this day. So what are the effects of the King in the Mountain theme? How should we interpret it? First of all, you could dismiss these stories as romantic nonsense, in which case I hope you're content at least with enjoying the stories and don't go out of your way to try and deconstruct them or rubbish them or disrespect the beliefs of our forebears. But to those that see a deeper truth within these stories, you could see them in two ways. You could see these heroic figures as real in the here and now, lying asleep and awaiting the day when they're needed. Or you could see them as real, but their return will not be physical, but instead a spiritual return that emboldens their people to resist whatever problems or perils they may face. The King in the Mountain has, in my opinion, pros and cons when it comes to how a people will deal with hard times or impending threats. On the one hand, these heroic figures represent the best of us, the bravest and most dedicated to their people. Their example can and will serve as great inspiration to those resisting tyranny or invasion. In this sense, a people emboldened by their heroes to action is those heroes and kings returning just as they promised. On the other hand though, some interpretation of the King in the Mountain can lead to inaction or apathy. Some people might find themselves having such faith in the king or hero that they happily sit back and rely on the problems at hand going away. For example, a German might think, I don't need to do anything in the face of this invasion to my land. King Barbarossa will return and save us anyway. It should go without saying that any of the kings and heroes mentioned would be appalled by such a lazy attitude. In my opinion, I think that there is a deep truth to these legends. Do I believe that great heroes lie sleeping under a mountain or on a mystical island? Well, yes. As I speculated on earlier in the video, I think that there exists a number of realms and worlds that are beyond our comprehension. I believe that the spirit of such noble heroes, the energy that their names and stories hold, are very powerful. Will these heroes return physically as they once existed and lead their people in times of need? Perhaps, but I think it's more likely and more common for their spirit to return, be that in a way that reincarnates itself in an individual, or his people as a whole. If there's a King in the Mountain story from your country, please do let us know in the comments. I'm sure we'd all be interested. And as usual, thank you to my patrons and supporters, including those new people who have come to support me recently. Thank you very much. And I'll see you all again in the next video.